Welcome to Human Factors Tech, where we explore how technology is shaping the human experience. I'm your host, Jared Degnan. Every week, we dive into the latest innovations in AI, human factors, and design. We'll talk to experts who are building the next generation of technology that empowers and inspires. Join us as we uncover how tech is transforming the way we as humans live, work, and connect. Let's build better technology that embraces and enhances the human experience. Welcome back to Human Factors Tech, where we talk all things technology, how it augments and leverages human behavior, and makes our lives just a little more human. My name is Jared Degnan. Thank you so much for joining us. As always, the exploration continues, and I'm so excited to bring you another episode today, talking about a relatively, I don't know if I would call it a worn out topic, but this is a topic, particularly in AI, that's been around for several months, if not about a year. And it's this concept of different types of data and its utilization within AI. So today we're going to talk specifically about synthetic data and augmented data, some of their use cases, and some of the ways that professionals like you and I can use these types of data to make more human experiences. Now, I'm going to fully admit that as I was doing research for this episode, I really went down a rabbit hole, and I didn't truly understand the differences between different types of data. In fact, there were some things I really didn't wrap my head around, at least at first. So hopefully I will be able to help you understand a little bit more about this world and what it portends. So let me start off by posing a particularly interesting question. And I was thinking back to some of the interviews that I had in business school and maybe before. And there was this great question that always came up, and maybe you had it as well. It was the question of, sell me this pen. An interviewer would hand you a pen, and you would have to come up with a way of selling it. There's a classic Wolf of Wall Street scene where the protagonist, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, plays this out. And it's a trope that occurs throughout the entire experience. And it's usually a measure of how good of a salesperson you are. But I was really thinking about this kind of experience. And I thought to myself, the question really isn't about creativity. I mean, it is about creativity, but it's not. It's really about creating context. Because if you answer the question effectively, you are basically saying, here's the pen, here's the interviewer that is looking for an answer, and how you can triangulate information. And in that way, the question is a lot more about creating data that doesn't already exist, because theoretically, you're not an expert at the pen. I mean, at one point in time, I actually think I interviewed with one of the companies that invented Sharpie, and obviously they have the information, but of course I don't. And it was really interesting to think about, well, how do you really answer this question? And then this whole concept of synthetic data and augmented data came up, and I started diving down the rabbit hole, and some of this stuff is just really fascinating. So let's first start with some, raw definitions. So when we think about it, there's really a very specific distinction. So let's start with augmented data. Augmented data is data that is extrapolated but then added to an existing data set. So in the teaser, I talked about having manufacturer information from a pen. Think about a retailer that has not just a single SKU, like a pen, but maybe hundreds of thousands of SKUs, and it might come from different manufacturers. The fact of the matter is that you can't always have information that is the same from manufacturer to manufacturer, and you don't always have the right information. But that's where augmented data comes in. You'll be able to take things like machine vision or maybe even some contextual generative AI and create more information about the pen. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. But then let me also then turn to this idea of synthetic data. Now, synthetic data is a more interesting and nuanced topic. And the definition that I found that I really like is that It's data that replaces but has the same statistical properties to other data. Now, let me tell you guys, this really threw me for a loop because obviously I've been exposed to statistics. I've worked with statistics. Data is something that is quite natural to me. I'm not a data scientist, but I get it. So the question is, how can data be data if it's not accurate? And the answer that I found really comes from healthcare. In healthcare, you have this concept of publicly identifiable information, or PII. And if you were to use a data set that comes directly from patients, you can see how this might be a problem. You might see how personally identifiable information might violate HIPAA. It might, cause all sorts of problems, and definitely starts in on an ethical problem area. But what's really interesting about this is that when I started to look a little bit more in depth about augmented data, I found a really great graphic that I'm going to share with you right now. If you think about the original set of data, it's going to have a certain statistical pattern to it. It's going to have a mean, a median, a mode. It's going to have outliers. It's going to have a certain variance. Synthetic data does not control C, control V the data, but what it does is it creates data that is replacing the original data in a way that mimics the same statistical patterns. Now, if you're a student of black swan theory, you know that this opens up a lot of questions, particularly when we think about the outliers and their potential impact to some of our planning. Business models are based on statistical curves. They're based on this idea that we can predict certain actions. And as a human factors podcast, we know that there is no such thing as perfectly predictable behavior. And that's where I put in a little bit of grain of salt around synthetic data. There is a great podcaster out there by the name of Sonu who does a phenomenal introduction to how you generate synthetic data in a way that is both effective and safe. But I will mention that I will also put not only the link to Sonu's great hour and something lecture on creating synthetic data in the show notes, but I'll also link to some interesting journal articles about ethical implications of synthetic data and the limitations of it. But I'll just say that, synthetic data has an enormous amount of potential, if only because it allows us to scale. So let's just say that we have, a data set of, 100,000 potential transactions. This comes with, some publicly available data. It might include credit card numbers, etc. Obviously, this is where synthetic data will come in handy because you are able to not only take that 100,000, but then extrapolate it to 100 million and then run simulations on it. You are able to do a lot of what Spotify does. There's a great article in the Harvard Business Review that just came out talking about Spotify, its personalization efforts, and how rather than simply doing, a couple dozen cycles of personalization, it does several thousand per minute. And that's why Spotify personalization works potentially so much better than other personalization efforts. And I really, really love that. Now, the other piece of the puzzle is this idea of augmented data. Now, let's kind of talk about augmented data and what it is and how it's created. So think about a data set that you have, again, going back to the idea of this pen. You have the SKU number, maybe the brand, the color, the size. Augmented data, though, takes that data a step further. It might say, well, the brand is this, therefore, it is a lookalike audience to another brand type. Delta and American Express is a good example. Another good example might be ideal writing conditions. So think about, a Sharpie. A Sharpie is great for writing on certain things in certain ways and certain capabilities. However, a Sharpie might not be great for writing on something underwater. So let's just say that I set up a chatbot and I'm looking for the perfect pen. And I tell you that I am going to be using it for underwater exploration, and I'm a biologist, and I'm going to be using it to record information. Well, obviously, I shouldn't get a Sharpie as a recommendation. I should get something else. I should get maybe a different version of a Sharpie that is good for writing underwater. But, this just gives us really great examples of how we can extrapolate information from base data that really helps us personalize. And, what's interesting about this is that this is not something that is ridiculously hard. Now, I will tell you that I dabble in data. I certainly work in AI, but this is where working with your data scientists can be incredibly valuable. And if you know what to ask for, it becomes a much different ball game. In fact, I love working with some of my data scientists and some of my solutions architects because if I know what I want and I ask them for certain things, they're a lot more amenable. So let's kind of give an example. Let's say you have a real set of data, like product information that's provided to you by a manufacturer, or let's just say several dozen manufacturers. Well, then you can augment this with machine vision. So you take a look at a whole bunch of different potential photos and videos of these products in action, and you reference them against certain models. This then gives you some ability to apply AI reasoning, which is both large language models, so contextualizing things like generative AI, where it can understand the relationship between one thing and another, but then it can also include some defined logic. And what I mean by defined logic is this idea that if I'm an expert creator of pens or user of pens, I can provide my expertise as a model for how pens are supposed to be used. That's what gives us augmented data. So suddenly we're going from having just a set amount of information to, again, that infinite amount of information about a pen that suddenly allows us to create much more personalization. And a good example of this is that there are a lot of retailers out there that say they do personalization, and they do personalization. However, they're limited to a very set amount of SKUs. For instance, they might only have complete data for maybe 100 SKUs when their full stock is 100,000 SKUs. This is where augmented data can come in, and it can really help us out because it can truly personalize not just that single set of SKUs that do have complete data, but it can complete the equation for all of us. So, looking back at it, and in particular, I like to think of it like, synthetic data and augmented data are both theoretically made up, but synthetic data is statistically replicatable data, and augmented data simply enriches the data that we already have. So if we think about these use cases in my professional life, have to look at different personalized experiences and what I want to create. And the limitation is always data. Not only is the limitation the amount of data that might have about a product or about a consumer, but it's limited statistically valid information. That's where not only can I create extrapolated data sets and run simulations, but I can suddenly create examples where instead of, this product is recommended by, 12 people that did a review, I can then do some modeling and create some statistical models about, what this product might be for and how people might react to it. This also has amazing implications for limited time offers. It has amazing implications for promotions where even if you don't use it for personalization efforts on the front end, you can use it on the back end to run, again, those simulations and figure out, will these things work or won't these things work? A great example is elasticity testing. Elasticity testing usually requires you to have a large statistical amount of information or a set of respondents. But using synthetic data, you're able to create a much bigger data set to then test that augmented information, that potential elasticity of a particular price. So, that's really all I had for today, because I truly think that a lot of this stuff is just extremely fascinating, and it has a lot of implications for us as experienced design professionals, and it can take what we do to all new levels. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you again. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share this information with your friends and your professional family. I hope everyone is gearing up for a great Thanksgiving Day season. If you are crazy enough to run Thanksgiving Day races like I am, I wish you luck. I hope you have some great time with your family. And until next time, please stay human, and we will catch you next time on Human Factors Technology.
Thanks for joining us on Human Factors Tech. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. To stay up to date on future episodes and explore more about how technology is shaping the human experience, follow us on Instagram or visit our website at humanfactorstech.com. Until next time, stay human and keep building technology that empowers and inspires.